Hi, it's Carol Rizzolo back again with the next segment of the Odyssey. I did want to show you a new book has come out that's actually fabulous. It's this beautiful book. It's the first time the Odyssey has been translated by a woman. Her name is Emily Wilson, and it's just a really lovely, one more lovely expression of this ancient text. So I just wanted to share that before I get started. Okay. So where we left, we had Odysseus, who was on the island of the Phaeacians with King Alcinous and his wife, Queen Arete, and he had now begun to tell his story. And what he describes is when they are leaving Troy, they've left the city burning in ruins, and when he leaves Troy, he and his men, 12 ships, each with 12 men in them. Remember I spoke some about the mythical nature of 12, being the numerics around all of these stories are fascinating. 12 being a combination between 3, which is the Trinitarian ideal, kind of the divine ideal, and 4 being the 4 cardinal directions. So when we combine 3 and 4, whether it turns to 7 or whether it turns to 12, we've clearly kind of we're speaking about an entire cosmos. Right, the idea of the holy divine and then the groundedness, putting them all together. Okay, so when Odysseus and all of his men left Troy, their first stop, as I had said before, was the island of Ismaris, which is the land of the Cicones, C-I-C-O-N-E-S. And what happens is Odysseus and his men get onto the island, and they are raping, marauding, and pillaging, just behaving really terribly. They're behaving much like warriors, bringing back spoils of war. And the Cicones basically chase them out, killing many of them. Odysseus and his men race back to their ships, and they take off, and they start rowing as fast as they can to get out of there without a whole lot of upset about the men who they've lost. You kind of hear about it a little bit, but really not much. Their next stop is the land of the Lotus Eaters, you recall. The land of the Lotus Eaters is where the men go up, except Odysseus stays back. And the men go up and they all meet the Lotus Eaters who are chewing on lotuses, getting completely stoned. And they completely forget that their mission and their interest was indeed to go home. Odysseus goes up, he brings them all, kind of basically drags them all back onto the ships, and they set sail again. Their next stop, and this is where we pick up this section, their next stop is the island of the Cyclops. The winds blow them, and they land on an island. It's sort of an unusual island where they land on an island where there are sheep grazing and rams and ewes all grazing there, but there doesn't seem to be any sign of habitation by humans or any human-like being. And so they feast merrily. They still have wine left on their ship from Troy. They still have food. And they slaughter many of the animals, and they feast. But then they look across the inlet, and they see that there's an island there with a cave. And the cave, Odysseus has the sense that there are signs of life here. So he takes his 12 best men, and they take the ship across to go explore this island. They go onto the island, they go up, and they head towards that cave. And they go into the cave, they find wine and cheese, and they are feasting, waiting for the host to come back. In that cave, they also see lambs and ewes, all separated by their ages. So they're each caged by their ages. There's sign of an old fire that was there. They're very clear there's habitation has happened here. And the men say, okay, let's get what we want and get out of here. And Odysseus says, no, we're going to wait and introduce ourselves to the host and really engage in the proper guest-host relationship. But they already are not behaving properly. The proper guest-host relationship would be that they asked, right? That they would come in, they wouldn't eat through all of the food of the host without having been offered. So the men say, we want to get out of here. Odysseus says, we're just staying here and we're going to be proper guests. And then as the day is ending and daylight is fading, suddenly all of these other sheep and rams are coming running into the cave. And the men are clear, they're being driven in, the animals are being driven back into the cave. And behind the animals comes this massive one-eyed giant. This one-eyed giant is the Cyclops. His name is Polyphemus. He is the son of Poseidon, god of ocean. Polyphemus comes in. He's got all of the animals have run in ahead of him. He rolls a massive boulder in front of the mouth of the cave so the animals can't get out. And this is clearly his nighttime ritual. He goes through, he takes the littlest sheep, he puts them at the teat of their mothers. He does all of his chores in a very clear order, and then he turns around and he sees Odysseus and his men. And basically bellows out, and who are you and what are we doing? What are you doing here? And Odysseus, says, hello. They're all terrified because this guy from the race of the giants is an ancient race. I want to point out something about the Cyclops and sort of the psychological aspect of the Cyclops and of Polyphemus here. If you were to cover a single eye, the thing that you lose is depth perception. So we can know that an ancient race with no depth perception is very much a metaphorical comment by the author. So now they're in a cave, which in many religious belief systems, the cave is certainly a place where people learn, where people might connect with the divine. We've gotten that in the story of Abraham, we've got it in the story of Jesus, and in Muhammad there's a cave and there's a transformation that occurs there. But in this one, this is an ancient cave, and we've got a one-eyed giant there. So he turns around, he sees Odysseus and his men. Odysseus starts trying to talk to him, and in response, the Cyclops says, well, it's great to have you. I will just eat you very slowly. And he grabs one of the guys, he slams him on the ground and shatters his brains. The description in the story is gruesome. We've got brains all over the floor of this cave. The Cyclops pulls them limb from limb and pops them into his mouth and eats them. And now the men are terrified, absolutely terrified. And Odysseus starts to call out to Polyphemus. And the next thing Polyphemus does is he grabs a second one. He pops him in, same story, slams him on the ground, pulls him limb from limb and eats him. And Odysseus and the men are now terrified. But Odysseus, wily Odysseus, right? This is how we know him and have come to know him. Wily Odysseus is plotting a plan, trying to figure out what to do. The men are awake all night long. The giant falls asleep, but they can't get out because this boulder in front of the mouth of the cave. When morning comes, Polyphemus wakes up. He again snacks on a couple of men for breakfast, and he rolls the boulder out of the way, and one by one he has his hand going across the backs of the ram so that he's counting them as they go out. And the sheep and the ewe and the lambs continue to be in their pens. He takes care of, he's very orderly. There's kind of a fascinating aspect to this. Everything is happening in a very orderly fashion, that he's taking care of these animals. So all of the rams go out, and he goes out behind them, and he just leaves the boulder. He doesn't push the boulder in front of the cave again. Odysseus and his men, the men say, let's get the hell out of here and get back down to the ship. And Odysseus says, I'm plotting my revenge. And the men say, forget revenge. We want to survive this. But as it turns out, Odysseus is going to win this. He says, we're not leaving. I am taking revenge on what's just happened and on losing four of my finest men. So they plot, they figure out what they're going to do. Odysseus explains to them that what they are going to do, there's a big green piece of olive wood that the giant's going to use, appears to be using as a walking stick. So interestingly, the olive tree is connected to Athena, right? This is how she became the patron goddess of Athens, where she had planted an olive branch and it sprouts into an olive tree and gives olives and oil as well as wood. Her competition at the time was Poseidon, who also wanted to be the patron god of the city that becomes Athens. But what he does is he basically takes a stick and he slams down into the ground and says, I can give you water any time, but what springs up is salt water. So the people of the city choose for Athena. The city is named Athens. And you remember I spoke about her birth story of coming out of her father's head. It's the process of parthenogenesis. So she is called Athena Parthenos, reference to her birth story, and the Parthenon in Greece, and also in Nashville there happens to be one, but the Parthenon in Greece is named for Athena, and a kind of a tip of the hat to her birth story. Okay, so we're back at the cave of the Cyclops. Odysseus sees this big green piece of olive wood, and what he and his men do is they drag it over to the fire, and it's not far from the fire when Polyphemus, when all the animals, the day is now done. This is day 2. The rams come in, Polyphemus is there counting them all. He goes through all his evening chores. He rolls the boulder back in front of the mouth of the cave, and Odysseus and his men believe they're ready for him. But sort of. They're not quite ready for him because he grabs another couple of men, and finally Odysseus says, listen, we have some really great wine. You want some? And Polyphemus says, sure, let's sit down and have some wine. And as a thank you for giving me the wine, I'll eat you last. So what Odysseus does is he takes undiluted wine and he pours it into a cup and proceeds to get Polyphemus drunk. Right? Polyphemus takes the first glass and says, hey, that's great, give me more. So we have total gluttony happening in this ancient race with no depth of perception. It's just a really interesting set of images. So Polyphemus passes out drunk. Odysseus and his men grab that green olive wood and they sharpen it to a point and they put it into the fire so it gets till it's flaming, flaming hot red. It takes 4 of them. Now remember, 4 is that number of groundedness, right? The 4 cardinal directions, they are grounded. It's a solid way of being. So they take this thing, it is this big piece of olive wood, it's flaming, it's sharp. It takes 4 of them to climb up onto the belly of Polyphemus, and they jam it into his eye, and they twist it and they turn it, and again, the author is very graphic about what's happening to the contents of his eye. Now what I need to tell you is during that drinking game, Polyphemus had said to Odysseus, so what's your name? Who are you? And Odysseus said, my name is No Man. Really clever. Odysseus is just kind of our wiliest self. And again, Polyphemus said, well, No Man, then I'll eat you last as a thank you. That's my gift back to you. So now, what happens when the men drive this stake into Polyphemus's only eye? He starts screaming and screaming, and the other Cyclops from around the area come running, saying, what's the matter, what's the matter? And Polyphemus yells out, no man is hurting me, no man is killing me. And the other Cyclops say, well, if no one's hurting you, then we're just going to go home. So what Polyphemus does is his morning routine, right? He rolls the boulder out of the way, and what Odysseus has now done during the night is he has strapped each of his men in between 3 rams. So each man is underneath the belly, roped on, right? They all have twine, they're all roped on there on the bottom of each of these rams, very much like Christ between the beggars on the cross, right? They're each basically in a cross crucifixion kind of position underneath the ram. The ram was the symbol of the sun god. In many cultures leading up to the telling of the Odyssey, the ram was the image of the sun god, like from Jason and the Golden Fleece. They're chasing the golden fleece of the image of the sun god, or a symbol of the sun god. So for this to be a ram is noteworthy because it's a connection to a solar god. It's absolutely a statement of the divine. And here we again see that Trinitarian motif repeating. Right, we've got the three rams, the man underneath it making the 4th, so that we now again are grounded. Each one of these is a grounded escape. Odysseus is hanging on to the belly of the largest ram. He couldn't rope himself in. We again have the 3 across with the largest one. Polyphemus has his hand running across the backs of all of them as they go out. This is the escape. And Polyphemus does say to the large ram, you're going so slowly. Usually you're the first one out, but this time you're so slowly. going so slowly. I wish you could tell me why. You know, what's happened? But of course, the ram can't speak. And the ram, like I said, is kind of the symbol of supreme enlightenment, the solar god, the sun. So Odysseus and his men all make the escape. Polyphemus is now screaming. The other Cyclops are around. And what happens is Odysseus and his men make their way, or the remaining men, make their way back down to the ship. They row like hell across that little isthmus to get to where the other ships and the other men were and are. And they take off. And now they're out in the water when Odysseus's hubris gets the best of him. And he gets up on the prow of his ship and he says, if anybody asks you what happened to me, you tell them it's Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca, who has done this to you. Well, this is about the worst thing that he could have done. He was so clever to say it's no man, but now Polyphemus knows exactly who has done this. And Polyphemus prays to his father, please don't let this man ever get home. Make him suffer. And all of a sudden, Poseidon brings up this massive storm in the ocean. The Cyclops are throwing these, they're basically taking off the top part of a hill or a mountain and whipping it at the ships. Some of the ships are being broken, masts are being broken, and it is really just barely truly by the grace of Poseidon that they escape at all. But no one dies there. We've only lost the men, we have lost the men up in the caves. And now the men are really rattled. They're just really shaken, they're very frightened. And they are now, again, kind of on their way. They're in a storm, but they are on their way to the next place where they can land. Okay, so the next place they go, the next place they land is the island of the winds. Aeolus, A-E-O-U-L-U-S, Aeolus, is the king of the winds. He's got 12 children, 6 boys, 6 girls. They are married to each other, and there are all sorts of stories about him, but he's understood to be the one. So when we think about the wind, right, in English, we speak about, like, if I'm going to take in a breath, I'm going to inspire. I'm taking in the spirit, right? It is inspiration. And of course, then it goes to inspiration beyond the actual movement of I am inspiring. But the idea that the wind is the spirit, that the wind is the breath of fresh air. These are all controlled as far as the Greek beliefs are. They're anthropomorphized, so they're given human qualities. They're given human qualities, but they are clearly of the gods. Odysseus and his men are scared. They are beaten down, and they show up at this man's island, at this god's island, and they are feasted and feted, and they're well fed, and they are actually there again for a full cycle. So they're there for 12 months on this island. You know, again, 3 times 4, but they're there for a full cycle of a full year. And then Aeolus promises what he will do is he will control all of the winds and give them only the favorable winds to take them home again. So when you think about what's home, right, this is a time in our story, home is Ithaca, is a land, it's a place. But the idea of being able to go home, like what does that actually mean, right? The other piece of that is going where you know you feel grounded, you feel accepted, you feel right within yourself. So there's a personal sense of coming home. This kind of always makes me think of the story that Bart Giamatti told, Renaissance lit professor from Yale who became the baseball commissioner, who spoke about baseball as the great game of life. And what he spoke about was you start out from home and you are trying like hell to get as far away as you can from home and to get away from home. Right? So with that first hit, you make it to first base. With the second hit, you make it to second, or with the next hit, somebody else has to assist you, and you make it as far away from home as you can possibly get. And then, of course, the only way you win a home run or you score anything is you've got to find your way back home from a different direction so that you actually see home in a different way from a different perspective. So So Odysseus going home, you know, we can think about it as a warrior returning, right? He's had these terrible experiences. We don't have any sense that his behavior is actually improved, right? I mean, the first island where people are dead and he doesn't really care a whole lot. The second one where everyone else is getting stoned, so we kind of know that maybe Odysseus's role is not to get stoned, and that that's not the way home, right? That forgetting everything is not the proper way to come back to self and soul. And certainly having to destroy the depth of, having no depth of vision, that's an old way of being. And again, I mean, Polyphemus is a race of the giants. He is of the oldest of the older of the gods. But he's, you know, we're watching things get shed. As Odysseus comes home, we're watching things get shed. So we're very hopeful when he gets to the island of the winds to say, this is great. You know, now a benefactor has arrived. Odysseus has found a benefactor who is going to give him everything he needs. He's fed, he's watered, he's wined, he's dined, he's there for a full cycle. And then the benefactor says, okay, you're ready to make it in the world with my support. So what Aeolus does is he puts all of the winds in a big bag, big sack, ties it off really tightly. Odysseus never tells his men on the ship what's in that bag, but they put the bag on the ship and they are headed for Ithaca. Everybody's excited. It's taken them years to get home from Troy. They haven't seen their home in years. Total excitement. Odysseus is awake. He is intentional. He is watching. He is guarding this bag, because the only wind that's blowing is the one wind that's going to blow him directly home. Except Odysseus falls asleep. They are within sight of Ithaca. They can see it. And the other men on the ship say, I'll bet he's that bag is so heavy, I'll bet he's hiding gold in there. He always keeps everything for himself. I'll bet this is all about him. I'll bet Aeolus sent him home with all sorts of goods and riches, and we want our share because we're doing all of the work. So they untie the bag. All of the winds get released, and the ship gets torn to tatters. A lot of the men die, and Odysseus is basically found on a raft. And he is blown back, and he is blown right back to the benefactor, to the island of Aeolus. But now his ship is shot to hell, and he's desperate. He's been beaten by storms on the water, and has lost all of his men. So he goes up onto Aeolus and says, please, please give me a second chance. He's almost there, but basically the men on his ship, we can understand them to be sort of inner aspects of Odysseus, and they just foil him. It just gets foiled. So he gets back to Aeolus, who says, you know, you're obviously cursed by the gods. Get the hell out of here. I am not going to give you a second chance. Right? So those are now our two islands, the Cyclops and the island of the winds. And that's where we're going to end this one. And then our next section, we will pick up with the next two islands. Thanks.